It was supposed to be a routine transatlantic flight. New York to London, flight 714. The kind of journey thousands make every day, with nothing more remarkable than a choice between chicken or pasta for dinner. The plane, a gleaming silver giant, lifted off into the night sky, engines humming steadily as the city lights faded below. Inside, passengers settled in for the long haul, some flipping through magazines, others absorbed in the glow of their screens, a few already drifting into uneasy sleep. The soft hum of conversation mixed with the occasional clink of glasses and the rustle of blankets being pulled up against the chill. The cabin crew moved quietly, their practiced efficiency a comfort to the travelers. Everything seemed as it should be. But beneath the surface, a subtle tension was brewing. Something was wrong, though no one could quite put their finger on it. It started with a simple head count, a routine check meant to be a formality. But as the numbers were tallied, a discrepancy emerged. One passenger was missing. According to the manifest, every seat was filled. Yet there it was, seat 17B, conspicuously empty. The seatbelt lay neatly across the cushion, untouched. No sign of a passenger, no indication anyone had ever been there. The crew sprang into action, searching every possible hiding place. Lavatories were checked and rechecked, galleys and crew compartments scoured. They even peered behind curtains and under seats, but there was nothing. No trace of the missing traveler. Passengers were quietly questioned. Had anyone seen someone move seats? Had anyone noticed anything unusual? The questions rippled through the cabin, unsettling the calm. Confusion spread like a chill. Some swore that 17B had been empty from the start, insisting they'd never seen anyone there. Others were certain. A man in a grey suit had taken that seat, briefcase in hand, quietly buckling in before takeoff. The captain was informed. He listened carefully, his face calm but his eyes betraying a flicker of concern. In the cockpit, the crew reviewed the manifest, double-checked the boarding list, and tried to find a logical explanation. The captain suggested it might be a clerical error, a simple mistake in the paperwork. But the unease in the cabin only grew. The crew knew what they had seen, and the passengers could feel the tension mounting. Flight attendants insisted they'd seen the man board. They remembered checking his ticket, greeting him as he stepped onto the plane. He had been real, solid, present, just like everyone else. But now, he was gone. No personal belongings, no trace of his presence. Just an empty seat, and a lingering sense of something inexplicable. He was real, until he wasn't. The empty seat became a silent focal point, drawing glances and whispers. It was as if the very air around it had changed, charged with a quiet dread. Every passenger felt it, the sense that something impossible had happened. The plane was sealed, thousands of feet above the ocean. No one could have left, no one could have simply vanished. Yet the evidence was undeniable. A man had disappeared from a locked, pressurized cabin, leaving behind only questions. The flight continued, but the atmosphere had shifted. Conversations grew hushed, laughter faded, and every creak of the fuselage seemed to echo with uncertainty. People clung to their routines, reading, watching movies, pretending nothing was wrong, but the illusion of normalcy was shattered. Every glance at 17B was a reminder. Something impossible had happened. The seat was no longer just a place to sit. It was a symbol of the unknown, a puzzle with no solution. When the plane finally touched down in London, the mystery didn't end. Passengers filed off the aircraft, their faces marked by fatigue and something else, an unspoken fear, a story they would struggle to explain to friends and family. The empty seat was more than a missing passenger. It was a question with no answer, a riddle that would haunt the memories of everyone on board. For some, it would become a story to tell at parties. For others, a secret they'd rather forget. And for Flight 714, it was only the beginning. The empty seat was a warning, a reminder that sometimes the most ordinary journeys can become the most extraordinary mysteries. The witnesses were credible: businessman David Chen in 17A, flight attendant Sarah, and a student in 18C. Each of them, from different walks of life, had no reason to fabricate their stories. They were strangers to one another, yet their recollections aligned with uncanny precision. David Chen, a frequent flyer, was the first to notice the man in 17B. He described him as a quiet presence, someone who seemed to blend into the background, yet left a distinct impression. The man was in his late 50s, dressed in a grey suit that looked slightly worn, his hair thinning, his eyes distant as if lost in thought or memory. Chen tried to make small talk, perhaps out of habit or politeness, but the man only nodded, offering a faint, almost apologetic smile. He remained silent, his hands folded neatly in his lap, his gaze fixed on the clouds outside the window. There was a sense of solitude about him, as if he carried the weight of invisible burdens. Flight attendant Sarah remembered him too. She recalled serving him water, noticing the way he clasped his hands together, fingers interlaced tightly, as if holding on to something precious or fragile. There was a faint scent about him, old paper perhaps, or lavender, something nostalgic that lingered in the air after she moved on. What struck Sarah most was his voice. When he finally spoke, it was barely above a whisper, gentle and deliberate. She couldn't recall the words, only the softness of his tone, the way it seemed to echo in her mind long after. It was a voice she wouldn't forget, though she struggled to remember what he'd actually said. The student in 18C, meanwhile, watched as the man stood up mid-flight and walked quietly toward the rear of the plane. He moved with a kind of careful purpose, not drawing attention, yet somehow everyone nearby noticed. The student waited for him to return, but the man never did. These weren't vague impressions, they were vivid sensory memories. Each witness could recall the details, the way the man's suit wrinkled at the elbows, the slight tremor in his hands, the distant look in his eyes. They remembered the sound of his shoes on the aisle carpet, the way he seemed to hesitate before leaving his seat. Multiple people, strangers to each other, described the same man. Polite, distant, unassuming. He was not remarkable in appearance, yet something about him made him unforgettable. It was as if he was both present and absent at the same time. A figure who belonged everywhere and nowhere. The seat he left behind was not empty at first. There were small signs of his presence. A folded newspaper, a half-finished cup of tea, a boarding pass tucked into the seat pocket. But when the crew checked, he was simply gone. No one had seen him disembark, and his name was not on the passenger manifest. He wasn't a ghost, he was real, tangible, and then, in a moment, vanished as if he had never existed. The crew searched the cabin, checked the lavatories, even asked other passengers, but no one could explain how he had disappeared so completely. The consistency of their accounts made the disappearance even stranger. Each person described the same details, the same mannerisms, the same sense of quiet sadness that seemed to surround the man in the grey suit. It was as if he had left a trace in their memories, a puzzle with no solution. No one could explain how he vanished. There were no gaps in the security footage, no record of him ever boarding or leaving the plane. It was as if he had stepped out of reality itself, leaving only questions behind. The man in 17B had interacted with the world, spoken, nodded, accepted water, then simply ceased to exist. His belongings remained, but he was gone, leaving behind a sense of unease that lingered long after the flight had landed. The mystery deepened, and the crew could only wonder. Was he a figment of collective imagination, or something else entirely? The story spread among the passengers and crew, each retelling adding new layers of speculation and doubt. Who was the man in the grey suit? Was he running from something or searching for someone? Or was he simply a traveller passing through, leaving behind only questions and the faintest trace of lavender in the air? The crew responded with professionalism, searching the plane from cockpit to cargo. Every compartment, every bin, empty. Theories emerged. Medical emergency, stowaway, panic-induced escape. But the plane was sealed. The doors couldn't open mid-flight. Security was too tight for a stowaway. Each logical explanation fell apart. The idea of a collective mistake surfaced. Had everyone imagined the same man? But the memories were too specific, too consistent. The crew whispered about the possibility of a shared delusion. Yet, the psychological puzzle offered no comfort. The man's absence was as real as his remembered presence. The flight pressed on, the mystery unresolved. The cabin was filled with questions no one could answer. At Heathrow, a sense of anticipation hung in the air as authorities gathered near the arrival gate. Security teams, police officers, and airport staff exchanged tense glances, all waiting for the arrival of a passenger whose presence had triggered more questions than answers. The atmosphere was thick with uncertainty, as if everyone sensed that something unusual was about to unfold. The official manifest was clear. Jonathan Harris, age 58, was assigned to seat 17B. His name appeared in the airline's records, his details meticulously logged. The check-in counter staff recalled processing his documents, and his boarding pass was scanned without issue. Everything about his travels seemed routine, at least on paper. His ticket was valid, his passport authentic, and he passed through every security checkpoint without raising suspicion. The staff who interacted with him described him as polite, quiet, and unremarkable. Just another traveler among thousands. But when investigators tried to trace his background, the trail quickly went cold. The address he provided led to a vacant lot overgrown with weeds. The phone number on his forms rang to a disconnected line. His listed employer, supposedly a small consulting firm, didn't exist in any registry. It was as if his entire identity had been fabricated for this single journey. The more they searched, the more it seemed that Jonathan Harris had materialized out of thin air, created solely for this flight. There were no records of him before the day of travel, no tax filings, no medical history, no digital footprint. Yet, security footage told a different story. Cameras captured him checking in at the counter, calmly presenting his documents, and moving through the security line like any other passenger. He was seen boarding the plane, his movements ordinary and unhurried. He was undeniably real, physical, present, and captured on multiple cameras from different angles. Staff remembered his face, and his image appeared in the airport's digital archives. But then, the investigation took a bizarre turn. Reviewing the footage, authorities noticed something impossible. Jonathan Harris appeared in two places at once. One camera showed him waiting at the gate, while another, just seconds later, caught him walking through a distant corridor. In one frame, he was buying coffee at a cafe. In another, he was seen near the boarding area at the exact same time. The timestamps matched, and the images were clear. There was no mistaking him. Investigators scoured the footage for signs of a twin or a look-alike, but found nothing. They checked for evidence of video tampering, but the files were intact and unaltered. Every expert agreed the footage was genuine. The digital trail, which should have provided clarity, only deepened the enigma. His electronic records were flawless, yet they led nowhere. Every attempt to piece together his story resulted in more confusion. Jonathan Harris existed, until suddenly he didn't. After the flight, he vanished without a trace. His seat was empty, his name erased from follow-up records, and no one could say where he'd gone. The investigation hit a wall. Detectives and officials debated theories late into the night, but every lead dissolved into uncertainty. The case became a source of frustration and fascination in equal measure. The man in the grey suit was both everywhere and nowhere, visible in the records, yet absent from reality. He became a ghost in the system, a riddle that no one could solve. In the end, the official record became a paradox. A detailed account of a man who, by every measure, should have existed, yet somehow never truly did. Human error was the first theory. Miscount, data glitch, a phantom passenger. But the crew's memories were vivid, tactile, serving water, hearing his voice. A glitch can't create physical presence or detailed memories. Surveillance footage was analyzed for errors, none found. The system worked perfectly, yet showed him in two places at once. Technology meant to clarify only confused. The logical explanations felt inadequate. The mystery was too big for simple answers. The digital and human evidence clashed. The ghost in the machine was more than a metaphor. The paradox remained proof of existence and proof of impossibility. The case defied logic. The questions only multiplied. When logic fails, we look inward. Could it be mass hysteria? Airplanes are stressful places, suggestion can spread. But these weren't vague impressions. People remembered conversations, actions, details. Mass hysteria can't explain the name on the manifest or the CCTV footage. The psychological explanation required too many coincidences. It asked us to believe in a perfect storm of memory, error, and suggestion. The mind is powerful, but not omnipotent. The evidence was too concrete, too consistent. The mystery resisted easy psychological answers. The man in the grey suit remained an enigma. When reason fails, speculation begins. Was he a ghost, a spirit replaying a final journey? Or was it a glitch in reality? Two universes intersecting, then diverging. Theories ranged from the paranormal to the quantum. None could be proven, but all tried to explain the impossible. A ghost that leaves a digital trail, a man who slips between worlds. These ideas are thought experiments, not facts, but they speak to our need for answers. The empty seat became a symbol of the unknown. Sometimes mystery is all we have. The investigation closed with no answers. The airline compensated passengers, offered counseling, and moved on. But the story lingered, a legend among crew and travelers. Official silence only fueled speculation and conspiracy. Was it a cover-up or genuine bafflement? The lack of explanation was the most disturbing part. Our systems failed to provide certainty. A man vanished, leaving only questions behind. The story of Seat 17B forces us to confront the limits of knowledge. Witnesses, technology, and absence, all true, all contradictory. Do we accept a cascade of errors, or allow for the truly strange? The mystery isn't about answers, but the questions it raises. How reliable are our memories? How much can we trust our systems? The man in the grey suit left a legacy of doubt and wonder. Sometimes
It all began with a child's stare. Sometimes the most unsettling stories don't start with a scream or a crash, but with a quiet, lingering gaze. A moment so ordinary it almost slips by unnoticed. But for Maya, that moment would change everything. On flight 237, 7-year-old Maya colored quietly, her crayons gliding over the page as the world outside the window disappeared into darkness. The hum of the engines was a lullaby, and the gentle turbulence felt almost like a cradle rocking her to sleep. Her mother slept beside her, head tilted against the window, lost in dreams. The cabin was dim, bathed in the soft blue glow of overhead lights. Most passengers were cocooned in sleep, faces turned away, headphones on, blankets pulled up to their chins. The world inside the plane felt suspended, as if time itself had slowed. But Maya's attention was fixed on the man across the aisle. She couldn't say why she noticed him at first. Maybe it was the way he sat so perfectly still, or the way the shadows seemed to cling to him more than anyone else. Something about him was deeply wrong. His face seemed unfinished, as if someone had started sculpting it and then abandoned the work. His teeth were uneven, jagged like broken porcelain, and one eye twitched in a way that made Maya's skin crawl. His skin was waxy, mannequin-like, too smooth yet somehow flawed, as if it were a mask, stretched too tightly over something else. The light caught on his cheekbones in a way that made him look almost artificial, like a doll left too long in the sun. He stared straight ahead, unmoving, not reading or using a phone, not even glancing out the window. He didn't fidget or shift in his seat like everyone else. He was a fixture, a piece of the plane itself. as if he'd always been there. When his gaze met Maya's, she felt a jolt. His eyes were hollow, empty, like the glass eyes of a taxidermy animal. There was no warmth, no spark of life, just a cold, bottomless void that seemed to swallow her whole. He offered a crooked, unnatural smile that didn't reach his eyes. It was a smile that seemed to mock the very idea of happiness, twisting his lips in a way that made Maya's stomach twist with fear. Maya looked down, heart pounding, her coloring book suddenly out of place in this new, darker world. The bright colors on the page felt childish, almost foolish compared to the shadow that had crept into her mind. She kept sneaking glances, hoping the man would change, that he'd blink or yawn or do something normal, but he remained a statue of strangeness in seat 14B, his presence growing heavier with every passing minute. The twitching eye, the waxy skin, the stillness, it was all there, a collection of details that didn't add up to a real person. Maya wondered if anyone else could see what she saw, or if the darkness was playing tricks on her. He never moved, never reacted, just sat in the dark, as if waiting for something only he knew about. The air around him felt colder, heavier, as if he carried a piece of the night inside him. The other passengers slept on, oblivious to the strange tableau unfolding just a few feet away. Their peaceful faces were a stark contrast to the fear that now gripped Maya. Maya was certain the man across the aisle was not what he appeared to be. She felt it in her bones, a certainty that made her want to run, even though there was nowhere to go. She tried to wake her mother, but got only a sleepy mumble, her mother's hand patting her arm before drifting back into sleep. Maya was left alone with her fear, the only one awake to witness the uncanny. Alone Maya watched, fear growing with every minute. The minutes stretched on, each one heavier than the last, as if the plane itself was flying through something thicker than air. The night felt endless, and the man's presence made it even darker. In that suspended world above the clouds, Maya realized she was the only one who saw the truth, and that truth was staring right back at her. The flight attendants noticed the man in 14B too. There was something about him that drew their attention, even in a cabin full of strangers. He didn't look out of place exactly, but he didn't quite fit in either. It was as if he was trying to blend in, but the effort itself made him stand out. He boarded quietly, ticket in order, but avoided all eye contact. His movements were careful, almost rehearsed, as if he'd practiced this routine many times before. He kept his head down, shoulders slightly hunched, and seemed to shrink into himself as he made his way down the aisle. Sarah, a flight attendant, offered him a drink. He refused, eyes fixed ahead. She noticed his hands were perfectly still, resting on his knees, and his breathing was so shallow it was barely perceptible. There was a tension in his posture, a sense of waiting. His face unsettled her. Features seemed to shift, as if not fully set. At first, she thought it was a trick of the light, or maybe her own tiredness. But the more she looked, the more she realized his face seemed to blur at the edges, as if it was never quite finished being drawn. The crew kept a discreet watch. They exchanged glances, silently agreeing to keep an eye on him. Something about the man in 14B made them uneasy, though none of them could say exactly why. Later, investigators reviewed in-flight security footage. They watched hours of video searching for anything unusual, any clue that might explain the strange reports from the crew. In one frame, the man's face matched Maya's description. The image was clear, his features ordinary, almost forgettable. In the next, his features subtly changed. Nose sharper, chin more defined, hair darker. The changes were so slight, so gradual, that at first they seemed like tricks of the camera or glitches in the video. The changes were undeniable, caught on camera. Frame by frame, his face morphed, never dramatically, but always just enough to be noticed if you looked closely. It was as if he was wearing a series of invisible masks, each one slipping seamlessly into the next. Experts found no evidence of tampering. The footage was real. They ran tests, checked for digital manipulation, but every analysis confirmed the same thing. What they were seeing had actually happened. His face was in constant subtle flux, as if reshaping itself moment to moment. It was a phenomenon no one could explain, a living paradox that defied every expectation. It was like watching a digital avatar being edited in real time, except this was a living person. The effect was mesmerizing and deeply unsettling, as if reality itself was bending around him. The implications were staggering. Biology, physics, logic, all defied. The investigators, seasoned professionals, found themselves questioning what was possible and what was real. The man in 14B wasn't just strange, he was impossible. He was a riddle that no one could solve, a presence that seemed to exist outside the normal rules of the world. He was a man of 1,000 faces, each flickering in and out of existence as he sat perfectly still. And as the plane soared through the night sky, everyone who saw him was left with the same question: who or what was the man in 14B? 3 hours into the flight, the cabin's quiet shattered. The gentle hum of the engines and the soft murmur of conversation were suddenly replaced by a jarring, collective gasp. It was as if the very air had changed, thickening with a sense of dread that swept through the rows like a cold wind. Delaney Reed, 2 rows behind the strange man, was the first to react. She gasped, her breath catching in her throat, and clutched her face in terror. Her hands trembled violently, knuckles white as she pressed her palms to her cheeks as if trying to hold herself together. Her companion Ben turned to her in alarm. He saw Delaney's eyes, wide and unblinking, filled with a horror so raw it seemed almost inhuman. Her hands clawed at her cheeks, nails digging into her skin as if she were trying to wake herself from a nightmare. Suddenly Delaney made a choking, gurgling sound. Her mouth opened, but no scream came out, only a strangled gasp. She thrashed in her seat, her body rigid with terror, as if some invisible force was suffocating her. A paramedic, alerted by the commotion, rushed down the aisle. Passengers craned their necks to see, some frozen in their seats, others rising in panic. But nothing could have prepared the paramedic, or anyone else, for what they were about to witness. Delaney's face was gone. Where her features should have been, her eyes, her nose, her mouth, there was only a smooth, featureless expanse of skin. It was as if her identity had been erased in an instant, leaving behind a blank mask that defied explanation. There was no blood, no wound, no sign of violence. Her face had simply vanished. The sight was so unnatural, so impossible, that for a moment everyone stared in stunned silence, unable to process what they were seeing. Delaney slumped forward, lifeless, her body limp in the seat. Around her, panic erupted. Passengers screamed, some scrambling into the aisle, others pressing themselves against the windows as if trying to escape the nightmare unfolding before them. The paramedic attempted CPR, but it was futile. Delaney was gone, her life snuffed out by an event with no name, no precedent, and no explanation. The horror of it settled over the cabin like a suffocating fog. Passengers whispered in terror, their voices trembling as they glanced towards seat 14B. Eyes darted nervously, searching for answers but finding only more fear. The strange man sat unmoving, his waxy face betraying nothing. He stared straight ahead, untouched by the chaos around him, as if he were merely an observer or something far more sinister. He was a silent witness to the horror, his presence casting a shadow over the entire cabin. Some wondered if he was the cause, others if he was simply another victim of the impossible. The cabin was gripped by fear, reality itself seeming to unravel at the edges. Every passenger felt the weight of the unknown pressing in, their sense of safety shattered. The impossible had happened, and no one could look away. Every eye was drawn to the scene, unable to comprehend, unable to forget. The man in 14B remained a fixed point of dread, an enigma at the heart of the terror. His stillness was more frightening than any scream. As the night deepened and the cabin grew colder, the mystery only grew. No one knew what had happened or what might happen next. All they could do was wait, trapped in the sky with a horror that defied reason. The captain announced an emergency landing in Denver. The cabin was tense, fear thick in the air. Passengers cried, others stared at the curtained-off seat where Delaney had died. All eyes turned to the man in 14B. Flight attendants kept watch, relaying their concerns to the cockpit. The man showed no reaction, no curiosity, no alarm, just stillness. As the plane descended, the crew planned to keep him in his seat for authorities. The plane landed, surrounded by emergency vehicles. Passengers were told to remain seated. Law enforcement would board first. The attendants watched 14B, but when police arrived, the seat was empty. The man had vanished. Seatbelt unbuckled, no one saw him leave. Passengers nearby were questioned. No one saw him move. It was as if he'd dissolved into thin air. He disappeared from a sealed plane, leaving only an empty seat and a chilling mystery. The impossible had happened again, deepening the terror. Authorities were left with nothing but questions. The faceless man was gone. The Denver International became the epicenter of a baffling investigation. Flight 237 was quarantined. Passengers bussed to a secure facility for questioning. Each was interviewed, faces etched with fear and disbelief. Forensics scoured seat 14B. No hair, no fingerprints, nothing. The man's ticket was traced to a cash purchase under a fake name, no address, no bags. He had, for all purposes, never existed. Security footage from the airport was reviewed. No sign of the man anywhere. He didn't appear on any camera. Didn't exit with the others. The only conclusion? He vanished on the plane itself. News of the incident leaked, sparking a media frenzy. Official reports were vague, but rumors spread. A woman with a missing face, a man who disappeared. The faceless man became a national obsession. Investigators faced a case with no suspect, no evidence, and no explanation. The mystery only deepened. With logic failing, the public turned to the paranormal. Online forums and late-night shows buzzed with theories. Some claimed the man was a soul-eater, feeding on identity. Others saw him as a doppelganger or harbinger of doom, a spirit mimicking human form. Some believed he was an alien poorly imitating humanity, his shifting face a sign of his true nature. His disappearance was seen as dematerialization, a return to another dimension. Modern myths, men in black, shadowy observers, were invoked. Each theory tried to explain the unexplainable. The faceless man became a symbol of the unknown. Fear of what can't be understood took hold. Investigators and scientists searched for rational answers. Was it mass hysteria, a collective delusion triggered by fear? Could Delaney's death be a rare medical event, an aggressive disease, a sudden stroke? No medical theory fit the facts, no blood, no wound, no known pathogen. The autopsy was inconclusive. The shifting face on video defied explanation. Digital forensics confirmed the footage was real. Some speculated about advanced technology, holograms, prosthetics, but nothing explained the disappearance. Every scientific path led to a dead end. The events of Flight 237 remained beyond reason. The mystery stood untouched by logic. Months passed and the investigation stalled. The case file grew thick, but answers never came. Agencies pooled resources, but the trail ended with the man's disappearance. The final report was non-committal, listing Delaney's death as undetermined and the man as a missing person. For passengers and crew, life was never the same. Many suffered nightmares, some became reclusive. Maya, the girl who first noticed the man, was haunted for years. The case was closed, a cold file in the archives. The story became legend, whispered among airline staff. The wall investigators hit was impossibility itself. Today, the mystery of the faceless man remains as deep as ever. The story blurs the line between true crime and ghost story. The file is closed, but the questions linger. Who was the man in 14B? Human, alien, or something else? Delaney's death is the anchor, a real tragedy at the heart of the mystery. Was she a random victim or targeted for reasons beyond comprehension? The story forces us to confront the limits of our knowledge. It asks if there's more to the world than we can explain. The mystery is now yours.
The world outside the window was a canvas of pure, unadulterated black, a vast expanse that seemed to swallow all light and sound. It was as if the universe itself had pressed pause, leaving only the faintest hints of existence beyond the glass. The darkness was punctuated only by the occasional, almost imperceptible glimmer, a distant star, bravely shining through the void, reminding me that even in the deepest night, there are points of hope and wonder. That single, faraway twinkle felt like a secret message from the cosmos, a gentle reminder that we are never truly alone, even when surrounded by emptiness. We were suspended between Boston and Los Angeles, a metal tube of humanity drifting through the night, thousands of feet above the earth, isolated from the world below, yet connected by our shared journey. The engines hummed, a steady mechanical lullaby that seemed to cradle the entire cabin. Most passengers had surrendered to sleep, their faces softened by dreams, bathed in the dim, ethereal blue glow of the overhead lights. I, Luke, a sleep-deprived architecture student, sat awake, my mind tangled with blueprints and looming exams. My thoughts raced, refusing to be quieted by the monotony of the flight or the gentle rocking of the plane. The stillness was almost oppressive, a heavy silence that seemed to press in from all sides, daring something, anything, to break it. It was a silence that made you hyper-aware of your own heartbeat, your own breath. Every minor sound, a cough, a click of heels on the aisle, the rustle of a blanket, felt magnified in the hush, echoing through the cabin like distant thunder. Even the softest whisper seemed to carry weight in the quiet. We trust strangers to fly us through a hostile sky, cocooned in recycled air and artificial calm. Each of us in our own private world relies on the unseen hands guiding us safely through the darkness. Yet beneath this manufactured peace, I sensed a tension, as if the quiet was a prelude to something unwelcome. It was the kind of silence that makes you wonder what lies just beyond the edge of perception. Precision and predictability are illusions. The calm is only the state before everything changes. In the air, we are always at the mercy of the unknown, no matter how routine the journey may seem. The night sky waited, silent and watchful, for the first crack in the calm. In that suspended moment, I realized how fragile our peace truly is, and how quickly the stillness of the night can give way to the unexpected. Seated to my left in 14A was a man who embodied corporate precision, impeccable suit, polished shoes, and a leather briefcase. He radiated control, reading his financial newspaper with the intensity of someone who believed the world depended on it. We exchanged no words. His aura of detached superiority made conversation unnecessary. I was his opposite, wrinkled clothes, overflowing backpack, and nervous energy. The contrast between us was stark, a silent narrative of order versus chaos. Even in sleep, he maintained perfect posture, hands folded, head upright. He was a statue of discipline, a mask of composure. Soon, I would see what lay beneath that mask. I drifted into a shallow, uneasy sleep, dreams fractured by stress and the sensation of falling. Suddenly, a cold spike of dread jolted me awake. The cabin looked unchanged, but something felt profoundly wrong. My heart pounded as I scanned the rows, senses on high alert. My gaze locked on the man in 14A, his stillness now tense, unnatural. I tried to rationalize my fear, blaming nightmares or exhaustion, but my eyes wouldn't leave him. The air around him felt colder, the quiet heavier. I leaned closer, noticing a faint tremor in his fingers, a tiny, unnatural twitch. It was a detail most would miss, but in my heightened state it was glaring. His perfect composure was cracking, the first sign that something was terribly, impossibly wrong. I couldn't look away. The transformation had begun. The twitching in his fingers intensified, sharp and mechanical, not the gentle movement of a dreamer. It was as if his hands were being manipulated by invisible strings, each jerk and spasm more unnatural than the last. The air around him seemed to thicken, charged with a tension that made my own skin crawl. I watched, transfixed, as his fingers danced erratically, tapping out a rhythm that belonged to no human anxiety I'd ever seen. His knuckles whitened, hands clenching as if fighting an invisible force. The tendons in his wrists stood out, straining against the skin, and his grip on the armrest was so fierce I half expected the plastic to crack beneath his fingers. Every muscle in his forearm quivered, betraying a silent struggle that no one else seemed to notice. My focus shifted to his face, half-shadowed, and I saw his nose begin to bend, as if soft wax was being molded. The transformation was subtle at first, a slight droop, a gentle warping of familiar features. But then, the cartilage seemed to ripple, reshaping itself in slow, deliberate waves. It was a sight both mesmerizing and deeply disturbing, as if reality itself was being rewritten before my eyes. His jaw stretched downward, skin pulled taut in a grotesque grimace. The corners of his mouth twisted, lips thinning until they nearly disappeared. I could see the muscles in his cheeks flexing, as if something inside was pushing outward, desperate to escape the confines of his human form. A faint, wet clicking sound accompanied the slow, impossible shift of bone and cartilage. It was a noise that seemed to echo inside my skull, a reminder that what I was witnessing defied every law of nature. Tiny beads of sweat formed along his brow, catching the dim cabin light and making his skin glisten with an unnatural sheen. His face bubbled, blisters rising and falling beneath the skin like boiling water. The flesh seemed to pulse, alive with a sickening energy, as if something beneath the surface was struggling to break free. Each blister would swell, then collapse, leaving behind a patchwork of angry red marks that spread across his cheeks and forehead. The transformation was not a medical emergency, it was a deconstruction of humanity. I realized with growing horror that this was not a seizure or a fit, but a systematic unraveling of what made him human. The man in seat 14A was being taken apart piece by forces I could not comprehend. The man's features twisted, his skin roiling, his form becoming unrecognizable. His eyes, once brown and ordinary, now shimmered with a strange iridescent light. His ears elongated, stretching into points, while his mouth widened into a silent scream. The boundaries of his body blurred, as if he was dissolving into the shadows that flickered across the cabin walls. I was paralyzed, forced to witness the horror inches away. My breath caught in my throat, my hands gripping my own seat so tightly my nails dug into the fabric. I wanted to look away, to close my eyes and pretend this was a nightmare, but I couldn't. I was trapped, a silent observer to the impossible. The calm of the flight was shattered. The gentle hum of the engines was drowned out by a rising sense of panic, a ripple of unease that spread through the cabin as others began to notice the disturbance. Flight attendants rushed down the aisle, their faces masks of confusion and fear, unsure how to respond to something so far outside the realm of normal emergencies. This was no longer a man beside me. The shape slumped in seat 14A was a mockery of human form, a shifting silhouette that seemed to absorb the light around it. Where moments before there had been a fellow passenger, now there was only a void, a presence that radiated cold and dread. It was something else, something inhuman. Its hands, once familiar, now ended in elongated claw-like fingers. Its face was a mask of shifting shadows, features melting and reforming in a grotesque parody of life. I could feel its gaze on me, even though its eyes were lost in darkness. The impossible was unfolding in the quiet dark. In that moment, surrounded by strangers and the hum of the aircraft, I realized that reality had slipped its moorings. The world I thought I knew was gone, replaced by something far more terrifying, and I was utterly powerless to stop it. The process accelerated. His body lost definition, shoulders shrinking and expanding, suit straining at the seams. A guttural, wet sound escaped his throat, alien and chilling. Terror broke my paralysis, but I couldn't scream. I could only watch. His limbs bent at impossible angles, jaw stretching wide, and from his mouth poured a soft, phosphorescent green light. The light pulsed, growing, seeping from his skin and suit, turning him translucent. The entity in 14A dissolved into a being of eerie, shimmering light. Then, a final, brilliant flash forced my eyes shut. When I looked again, the seat was empty. The man, the suit, the briefcase, gone. Only the seatbelt remained, fastened across nothing. He had evaporated, leaving behind a ghostly absence. The impossible had happened in silence. I stared at the empty seat, mind reeling in denial and shock. I squeezed my eyes shut, hoping the man would reappear, but the seat remained empty, the belt still fastened. A strangled gasp escaped me, breaking my paralysis. I fumbled with my seatbelt, stumbling into the aisle, heart pounding. The cabin slept on, oblivious to the horror I'd witnessed. I staggered toward the galley, desperate to tell someone, to prove I wasn't insane. I collided with a flight attendant who looked at me with concern. "Sir? Are you all right? You look like you've seen a ghost." I tried to speak, but only frantic, incoherent sounds came out. I could only point back toward row 14, toward the impossible emptiness of seat 14A. The image of the transformation burned in my mind. I needed someone to believe me. The flight attendant, Sarah, guided me to the galley, her voice calm and measured as she tried to make sense of my panic. The hum of the engines seemed to fade as we stepped away from the other passengers, the fluorescent lights of the galley casting everything in a sterile glow. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, my hands trembling as I tried to find the words to explain what I just witnessed. I stammered out my story. "The man in 14A, he's gone. He vanished. I saw him just moments ago, and now there's nothing. No trace." My voice cracked, and I could see the concern flicker in Sarah's eyes, though she tried to hide it behind a professional mask. She tried to reason with me. Maybe he went to the lavatory. Maybe I'd simply missed him slipping away. But I insisted, desperate, my words tumbling over each other. "No, you don't understand. He was acting strange. His face, it changed. There was this green light. Something was wrong." Another attendant joined us, drawn by the urgency in my voice. I described everything. The twitching, the shifting face, the unnatural glow. My story sounded unbelievable even to my own ears, but I couldn't stop. I needed them to believe me, to do something. The two attendants exchanged uneasy glances, their skepticism clear. I could tell they were humoring me, treating me as if I were delusional or simply overwhelmed by the stress of flying. But beneath their polite smiles, I caught a flicker of doubt, just enough to give me hope. To placate me, Sarah finally agreed to check the seat herself. She offered a reassuring nod, promising to investigate, though I could sense her uncertainty. I followed her, my anxiety mounting with every step. We walked down the aisle together, the cabin unusually quiet. When we reached 14A, the seat was empty, just as I'd said. The seatbelt was still fastened, lying perfectly across the cushion, as if the man had never been there at all. Sarah's composure faltered as she reached out and touched the belt, finding it firm and unmoved. Her eyes widened, and I could see the first cracks in her skepticism. She checked under the seat, then opened the overhead bin, searching for any sign of the missing passenger or his belongings. There was nothing. No bag, no jacket, not even a magazine left behind. The man and everything he'd brought with him had vanished without a trace. The seat looked untouched, as if it had been empty the entire flight. Sarah's skepticism melted away, replaced by bewilderment and a growing sense of fear. The impossible was undeniable now, and I could see her struggling to process what she was seeing. The crew's certainty was shaken. They huddled together in the galley, whispering urgently, their faces pale and anxious. The normal order of the flight had been upended, and no one knew what to do next. The mystery deepened in the hush of the cabin, a heavy silence settling over the passengers as the sense of unease spread. Something unexplainable had happened, and we were all trapped together, thousands of feet above the ground, with no answers in sight. The crew quietly searched the plane, checking seats, lavatories, and overhead bins. The man's briefcase and newspaper were gone, every trace of him erased, except the fastened seatbelt. The calm of the flight was punctured by an unsolvable riddle. The captain was informed, and a hushed call went out to authorities on the ground. I was questioned again, my account met with polite disbelief. I was the sole witness to an impossible event. As we began our descent, an announcement asked passengers to remain seated for a security check. Confusion rippled through the waking cabin, but no one knew the truth. I stared at the empty seat beside me, the seatbelt a stubborn testament to the impossible. The world outside continued, unaware. The mystery lingered in the recycled air. After landing, officials boarded the plane, photographing the seat and questioning me for hours. The man in 14A, Arthur Finch, was real, with a ticket, payment records, and security footage from Boston. But there was no record of him landing in Los Angeles, no bags, no family, no trace. The official story was a medical emergency, my account dismissed as stress-induced hallucination. People don't melt or dissolve into light, they said. But I know what I saw. Twitching fingers, shifting face, impossible green light. The incident left a permanent mark on me, a reminder that reality is not always as solid as we believe. The world demands logical answers, and when none exist, it invents them. But the question remains, haunting my quietest moments. What truly happened to the man in seat 14?
Have you ever sat on a plane and felt a strange presence? Maybe it's just nerves, or the hum of the engines, or the way the air feels different at 30,000 feet. But sometimes, it's something more. A chill that creeps up your spine. A sense that someone, or something, is watching. For the passengers of Flight 752 from Dallas to Seattle, that feeling wasn't just a fleeting thought. It was a shared experience. A tension that seemed to settle over the cabin like a heavy fog. Even before takeoff, some passengers exchanged uneasy glances as if they all sensed something was off. They spoke of a man in seat 14B, a window seat halfway down the aisle. He was there when the first passengers boarded, already settled in, staring out at the tarmac as if lost in thought. He never spoke, never ordered a drink, never even acknowledged the flight attendants. For 5 hours, he just stared out the window, unmoving, as if the world outside held all the answers he needed. Some passengers tried to catch his eye, but he seemed to look right through them. When the plane landed, he was gone. Not just missing, gone as if he'd never been there at all. His seat was empty, the aisle clear, and no one remembered seeing him stand up or leave. Flight attendants noticed first. The seatbelt was still buckled, a half-empty cup of water on the tray. The napkin was untouched, and the window shade was still open. But the man himself had vanished, leaving behind only the faintest trace of his presence. No one saw him leave, no record of him on the manifest, no ticket scanned. Seat 14B was supposed to be empty. The flight crew checked and rechecked the paperwork, but there was no mistake. According to the airline, that seat had never been sold. The crew described him: average height, dark hair, grey suit. He looked like any other business traveler, blending in with the crowd. But there was something about him that made people uneasy, a sense that he didn't quite belong. But his face? Unsettlingly generic, impossible to recall. When asked to describe him, witnesses struggled. His features seemed to slip from memory, as if he was a blank space in their minds. Security was alerted. The ground crew questioned, no answers. Surveillance footage showed nothing unusual, no one matching his description boarding or leaving the plane. It was as if he had appeared out of thin air and vanished the same way. How could someone sit on a plane, interact with the world, and leave no trace? The mystery deepened as the crew realized that even the seat's pressure sensor hadn't registered his weight. The initial report called it a minor anomaly, maybe a ticketing error, maybe a passenger who moved seats. But the more they looked, the less sense it made. There was no evidence he'd ever existed, except for the memories of those who saw him. But the crew couldn't shake the unease. One attendant swore his reflection in the window wasn't his own. Another said she felt a cold draft every time she passed seat 14B, even though the air was still. These details were dismissed as fatigue, but they were the first whispers of a story that would soon grow into something far more disturbing. Rumors began to spread among the staff, and soon, the legend took on a life of its own. The airline had no record of anyone in that seat. The seat was a ghost seat, occupied by a ghost passenger. Some began to wonder if Flight 752 had picked up something, or someone, not of this world. The puzzle made no sense. The man was a paradox, there and yet not there. The more people tried to explain it, the stranger it became. The story of Flight 752 was just beginning. Whispers of the phantom passenger would soon echo through airports and airline break rooms across the country. The mystery would soon challenge everything we think we know about who we share our world with. Was he a ghost, a figment of collective imagination, or something else entirely? The legend of the phantom passenger was born that day. It would be retold in hushed voices, growing with each retelling as new details and new sightings were added to the tale. And it would not end with a single flight. Other crews, on other routes, would soon report their own encounters with the inexplicable. The skies had a new secret. A secret that would haunt the dreams of those who spend their lives above the clouds. And it was only getting started. The story of the phantom of Flight 752 would become a legend, a warning, and a mystery that refuses to be solved. The incident on Flight 752 might have faded into obscurity, just another strange blip in the world of air travel, until it happened again, shattering any sense of normalcy. A week later, then again and again. Each time the pattern repeated itself, as if someone was testing the limits of the system, daring authorities to catch on. Always the same, an unremarkable quiet man in an unassigned seat, leaving behind a trace, a napkin, a magazine, sometimes just a faint scent of cologne, then vanishing without a trace. Airlines, now on high alert, were forced to report these bizarre breaches to authorities, their staff growing increasingly anxious with every unexplained incident. The FBI and Homeland Security launched a formal investigation, assembling special task forces and calling in experts from across the country. Security footage was pulled from every airport involved, every angle scrutinized, every second reviewed for clues. They searched for the man in the grey suit, circulating his image among airport staff and security teams worldwide. But he was never on camera. Not once, not in a single frame, no matter how many times they checked. The people around him appeared clear as day, but he did not. It was as if he moved through the world unseen by technology. No system glitch, no tampered footage. The equipment was flawless, the data untouched. He was a digital ghost, present in reality, but invisible to every electronic eye. Passenger manifests and ticketing data were cross-referenced, combed through line by line, flight by flight. No ticket, no name, no payment, nothing. He wasn't a stowaway, nor a glitch in the system. He sat in plain sight, a traveler without a ticket, blending in with the crowd yet belonging nowhere. The systems designed to track every passenger, every movement had failed in the face of this enigma. Investigators had eyewitnesses and physical evidence, items left behind, descriptions from passengers, but every database insisted the man did not exist. It was a paradox that defied logic, a riddle with no answer, leaving even the most seasoned detectives baffled. The case was no longer a standard investigation. It had become a journey into the unknown, a test of the very limits of modern security and reason. The authorities were hunting a phantom more real than a ghost, a presence that haunted every terminal and every mind involved. The mystery deepened with every flight, every unanswered question, every new report of the man in the grey suit. And the world's most advanced security was powerless, left watching, waiting, and wondering who or what they were truly dealing with. With no digital trail, investigators turned to physical evidence: a cup, a napkin, a newspaper. Forensics hoped for a fingerprint, a strand of hair, a clue. The results were chilling. The fingerprints didn't match any database, and their patterns were too perfect, almost artificial. The DNA was even stranger. It wasn't human. It contained familiar elements, but combined in ways that shouldn't exist. The lab ran the tests again and again. No error. The DNA was real. The man on the plane was not just undocumented, he was not human. The official report was classified at the highest level. The investigation was now a matter of national, maybe global security. Who or what was this traveler? Where did he come from? And what was he doing on commercial flights? The evidence pointed to something far outside normal human experience. The world had a new kind of mystery. The DNA results changed everything. The case was seized by a new group, men and women in unmarked suits, no standard ID. They took every file, every report, every piece of evidence. Flight crews were silenced with non-disclosure agreements. Official reports were rewritten to erase the mysterious passenger. Airline executives were told to erase internal records. The message: this never happened. Passengers near the man were tracked down, interviewed, and pressured into silence. The psychological pressure was immense. Most agreed to stay quiet. The cover-up was swift and total. Within weeks, all traces of the investigation were gone. The original agents were reassigned, the lab techs sworn to secrecy. A wall of silence was built around the affair, but secrets have a way of leaking out, and the story was far from over. Not everyone was silenced. In every story, there's always someone who refuses to look away, someone who can't ignore the truth, no matter the cost. Luke, a software developer with a sharp eye for detail, sat across from the man in seat 14B. He noticed things others might miss, the way the man barely blinked, how he seemed to watch everyone and no one at the same time. That night, unable to shake the encounter, Luke posted about it online. He described the man's unnervingly smooth skin, the empty eyes that seemed to look right through him, and the chilling sense that something was deeply wrong. The post quickly gained traction, spreading across forums and social media. People were fascinated and frightened by his account. But then, everything changed when the agents visited. Luke refused to sign a non-disclosure agreement, even as the agents pressured him. He stood his ground, unwilling to let his story be buried. He believed the public deserved to know the truth, no matter how unsettling or dangerous it might be. Taking a risk, Luke secretly recorded a tense conversation with the agents. He sent the audio file to a trusted journalist, hoping it would spark an investigation. But then, without warning, Luke vanished. His apartment was found unlocked, wallet and keys on the counter, laptop still on. There were no signs of struggle, no evidence of where he'd gone. It was as if he'd simply disappeared into thin air, no leads, no witnesses. He was just gone, leaving behind only questions and fear. The journalist's copy of the audio file was mysteriously wiped from every device as if it had never existed. Luke's online post was deleted, the thread locked, and any attempts to repost were instantly removed. Any mention of his name was scrubbed from the internet. It was as if Luke had never existed at all. The official story was simple. Luke was unstable and ran away. Authorities closed the case quickly, discouraging further questions. But for those who knew him, his sudden disappearance was a chilling warning. They whispered about what he'd uncovered and what it had cost him. The wall of silence was real and dangerous. It was a barrier built to keep the truth hidden, no matter the consequences. The message was clear. Some stories are not meant to be told. Those who try often pay the price. But the legend only grew. Whispers of Luke's story spread in the shadows, a reminder that the truth once glimpsed is never truly forgotten. The cover-up only fueled the legend. The story went underground, spreading through forums, encrypted messages, and late-night conversations. Sightings popped up on new flights, Denver to Atlanta, Boston to DC, San Francisco to Orlando. Reports no longer went to airlines but to conspiracy forums and paranormal sites. People described a man average height, dark suit, a face hard to remember. He'd appear, sit silently, then vanish. He never used the restroom, never had luggage, always chose a window seat. He never slept, only accepted a cup of water. The stories became consistent, painting a disturbing picture. The number of reports made the legend impossible to ignore. The authorities could erase records, but not silence the whispers. The mysterious traveler became a piece of modern folklore. The legend was alive, written in real time, one whispered sighting at a time. The skies had a new myth. As stories spread, a new detail emerged. The man's face seemed to shift and change. Witnesses described his features as subtly in motion, one moment middle-aged, the next younger, then older. A graphic designer saw his face flicker into that of an old woman, then back again. It was like watching a series of faces overlaid, never quite settling. The term, "the man with a moving face," appeared online. Some compared it to a glitching hologram, a computer graphic struggling to hold an image. The effect was subtle, but for those who noticed, it was pure horror. He wasn't just a mysterious traveler, he was something fundamentally wrong, trying to imitate humanity and failing. The moving face became the central element of his mythos. The legend turned from strange to nightmare. The skies were haunted by a face that was never the same twice. With the investigation shut down, the public speculated wildly. The most popular theory, he was a collector, not of souvenirs, but of faces. Each flicker was a new identity, a face taken from someone real. Some believed he was an alien scout, sampling humanity. Others thought he was a time traveler, or a being from another dimension. No theory explained everything, not the vanishing, not the DNA, not the physical evidence. Some said he was a spirit, bound to travel the airways. Others thought he simply existed in the blind spots of our world. The most frightening idea, he wasn't trying to do anything. He was just there. Not hostile, not friendly, simply other, a chilling, permanent feature of our modern world. Theories multiplied, but the truth remained out of reach. The legend grew with every unanswered question. The skies were no longer just for humans. The unknown had found a seat. Today, the case of the face-collecting passenger is officially closed, but the legend is more alive than ever. The government denies everything. Witnesses stay silent. Yet, the story persists, shared on screens in the dead of night. Who is he? Is he alone? The non-human DNA suggests something alien, but his behavior defies explanation. He observes, a silent passenger with no destination. The mystery is a perfect circle. Every clue leads to more questions. Some flyers now scan faces on every flight, searching for the flicker. The story taps into a primal fear that the world is not as it seems, and we are not alone. So next time you fly, look around. Most faces are ordinary,